try to just become the same blob of people, it doesn't work. That if you're trying to control the other person and you think they're trying to control you, it really doesn't change people's behavior. Instead, it makes people push those behaviors underground. They become more secretive. They get better at pretending like something isn't a problem. It really leads to a lot of dysfunction.
Welcome to the Happiness and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist, international speaker, mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This is a space where you belong, not because you earned it, not because of your title, your paycheck, or number of kids you have, but just because you are human and you are good. Here we explore progress over perfection, emotional and spiritual wellness, and how to relish the good parts of life that coexist with the not so good parts. This is Happiness in Progress. You guys, I'm so excited to share today's conversation with you. I got to talk with Amy Morin about her new book, 13 Things Mentally Strong Couples Don't Do. She is an international bestselling author. Her books, including 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, have been translated into more than 40 languages and sold more than 1 million copies. The Guardian dubbed her the self-help guru of the moment. Her TEDx talk, The Secret of Becoming Mentally Strong, is one of the most viewed talks of all time, with more than 23 million views. And she lives on a sailboat in the Florida Keys. And that's where we were able to meet up with her, virtually, of course. And we talked about what mentally strong couples don't do. And we picked out some of our favorite parts of her book. And really, I have to say, this book is incredible. And now I have her 5 other books on my list to read. I tried to get as much as I could from the book into this conversation, but you might just want to pick up a copy for yourself. I do have the link to the book in the show notes. But we talked about weaponizing emotions and what to do if you notice that you're manipulating your partner with emotions, or maybe it's the other way around, how to avoid trying to fix your partner, remembering why you fell in love. And we also talked a little bit about communication with your partner. We tried to hit on a lot. I thought this was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed talking to Amy, so I hope you like it as well. Let's get to it. Amy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So you have just written 13 things mentally strong couples don't do. Of those 13 things, is there one that stands out that would reach the widest group of people in terms of being able to impact their relationship in a positive way?
Yeah, that's a tough one. But if I had to pick one, I would say not using your emotions as a weapon.
Oh, that was my favorite. I'm so glad. So let's just jump right into talking about this. How are people using their emotions as weapons?
So it's one thing to you cry when you're sad, or you might
Mhm.
raise your voice because you lose your temper. But what I am seeing in a lot of couples who come into my therapy office is they're using their expressions of emotions as a way to manipulate their partner.
Mm.
So, for example, if somebody says, we were discussing our finances and I don't really want to discuss finances, so I just say I have too much anxiety, I can't talk about that right now. Really, it's just a cop out so they don't have to do it. Or somebody says, we were talking about something I did that upset my partner in the past, so I start to cry. Because if I turn on the waterworks, then it's my signal to my partner, like, this is too much for me, I can't talk about it right now. And it's definitely something that happens sometimes. Obviously, we get upset or you get heated in a conversation, and you might need to take a break. You might need to walk away from it. But it's important to come back and really discuss those issues, or to have a conversation that's tough to have. And I would find that when people were using their emotions as a weapon, they would just say, like, I can't do this because it's too upsetting for me. Really, they
Mm.
could. And they had no desire to work through it or to try to figure out how to problem solve. It was just a way to escape dealing with a problem.
Mm-hmm. The couple that you write about in the book, there's a woman who's trying to, and I just think so many people can relate to this, trying to guess what the emotion of her partner was going to be. What was he going to do next? Was this going to be too much? Was this going to be the perfect amount that he was going to be able to handle? And the way that this kind of panned out is basically she took responsibility for the things she could do and stopped the guessing. Talk me through a little bit of how, if someone is experiencing a situation where they're trying to anticipate the emotional needs and they're trying to guess the emotional needs of their partner, what can they do to change that pattern?
So sometimes that happens a lot too, that somebody will say, well, we need to discuss again, maybe the money or a parenting issue or something with the household, but I don't want to upset my partner. So I don't want to bring it up. And they think if
Mm,
I bring it up this way, it's my fault that they got upset because I was too direct or I didn't have a conversation beforehand. I didn't warn them we were going to discuss this. And often people take on those problems as their own, like my partner's reaction is my fault somehow.
mm,
And while, it does make sense to take some responsibility because we do share responsibility of how we have those conversations. On the other hand, you don't want to take on all the accountability and say, well, it's my fault. So in those situations, it's tough to do, but it's important to step back and say, what can I control? I can
mm,
control my own emotions and I can control the conversations that I do have with my partner, but their response is really their responsibility. It's up to them to decide. And if something's too upsetting, they have options. They could say, let's talk about this later, or can we take a break right now? They don't have to blow up. And just knowing that we're doing our partner a disservice if we don't think that they're mature enough or that they can handle their own emotions and we try to do it all for them. We're taking away opportunities for them to practice. How do you deal with feeling upset? How do you deal with sadness? How do you deal with anger? And for them to know that, like, no, that's their job too, is to figure out how do you regulate your own emotions. And it's not our job to regulate theirs.
mm-hmm. I if someone's listening, I'm imagining if you were in this situation, how scared or actually most of the situations of the 13 various things that couples don't do. If you're in the situation where you're like, "Oh, we do this. I want to improve this." That's kind of hard if you're in a world where you're walking on eggshells or if you already feel like you don't have that voice or you already feel like things have maybe gone in a way that you want to correct or yeah, I guess just correct. What would you what's the starting point?
It is tough to say I'm going to do things differently, and when we change things up, things sometimes get a little bit worse before they get better. So if you
Mhm,
say I'm going to respond to my partner different, or I'm going to approach problems in a different way, your partner might respond in a not so nice way because they want things to stay the same. So they're going to do everything they can to get you to go back to the way that you used to do it. But relationships are a lot like a dance. When you change your steps, your partner's kind of forced to change theirs. And you're not like dragging them out on the dance floor and making them do it, but you're just doing something different and it causes them to do something different. So I think it's important to say, all right, what can I change? How do I take this perhaps one small step at a time? You don't need to change everything overnight, but you might just say, today I'm committed to not raising my voice. I'm committed to holding a really tough conversation. I'm committed to managing my own emotions and knowing that outside of that, those things aren't within your control. If your partner gets really upset or the conversation doesn't go well, just I think it's important to celebrate your courage, the fact that you tried something new rather than beat yourself up if the end result wasn't exactly what you wanted.
I love that idea of celebrating your courage. In this part about the emotions, there's a little section that says create emotional rules for your home. And I loved that because you then listed so many various things and I don't think there's a wrong way of how your home manages emotions, whether you get really excited about things or you are kind of subdued when things happen. Talk me through how someone could start to create emotional rules for their home with their partner.
We usually nobody talks about this. We just sort
Mm,
of establish them when you get together with somebody, you move in and they just kind of happen and unfold. But the way that we respond to certain things, and it can be like, is it okay to slam a door? Is it okay to raise your voice? Is it okay to walk away? Somebody's having a bad day and they stay in the bedroom. Is that okay? In some households, that's normal behavior. In other households, it would be like, no, you go get that person, whether it's your child or your partner, and you drag them out. And even the fun stuff, like some families are watching sporting events and they're
mm.
cheering and screaming, and other families like that would just be not something that they do. So, and we usually learn these things from the family that we grew up with, what's appropriate and what isn't. If you grew up in a family where everybody's yelling all the time, you're not going to find it a big deal when there's yelling in your house. But for somebody who grew up in a family where voices were never raised, yelling might be like a huge boundary violation. So I think sometimes we can just step back and say, like, what are our emotional rules? Slamming doors, raising your voice. When we're mad, what's okay? Is it okay to walk away if you're upset about something? Is it okay to cheer loudly for a game? Like, what do we expect from each other?
what's so interesting to me when you talk about that is we are just two when a partnership comes together, it's people who are, who come from totally different backgrounds and totally different childhoods. And I love that you mention just talking about it, just setting the ground rules together, because at least you're bringing up that I come from this background, you come from this background. What do we want it to be like in our home?
Exactly. And I learned this probably the most from I was a foster parent for
Mm.
over a decade.
Wow.
And I would have kids that would come into my home and like what was normal in their home when they were growing up compared to like what my expectation was were often very different. So we started always having these conversations about emotional rules because I don't want you throwing something when you're angry, but maybe they grew up in a house where that was just done all the time. And so it works really well for situations like that. But I think anytime we're coming in together with where we're joining families, and especially for like step parents who are getting together with when they have pre-existing children, and it's
Mm.
kids know what the rules are in this new situation. And to really talk about like what are you comfortable with? What am I comfortable with? What can we do to make this better for us? And in the book, I also give an example of somebody that has PTSD, so loud noises are uncomfortable for them, but the rest of the family like to cheer for football games, so it was really loud and it was really difficult for the person who had a trauma history. So again, having those conversations of what's my expectation? How can we sometimes compromise? Noise canceling headphones, perhaps, or just knowing that when your partner walks away, they're not abandoning you, they're just taking a break because they don't want to lose their temper, but that you'll come back to it later. Those sorts of things can go a long way toward having those conversations so that you better understand each other.
And I love that example because you just build empathy in the talking. If you had your partner leaving every time you were doing the most exciting thing from your families, cheering for sports, you would feel a little abandoned. But
Right.
having that conversation just brings down all the walls and just builds empathy and strength in that relationship.
It does, because we make assumptions about why people do the things that they do, and they're often more times than not, they're not correct. We're like, "Oh, they're not interested," or they are refusing to have this conversation, or they don't wanna be involved. But when you understand the underlying reason for it, then you can, I think, get along a lot better and be like, "Oh, this is why this is happening, and here's what we can do moving forward."
Mhm. The other section that I loved was don't try to fix each other. And in this chapter, you share a woman who wanted to change her partner for the better. She wanted him to stop drinking. She was worried about how that was impacting his health. I think he had diabetes. And so she was just trying to help his health. But when she kind of broke it all down, she realized at the bottom of it was she was trying to fix him. And even though it was to fix him for the better, it was a dangerous pattern to be in for a relationship. Why is it so important that we don't try to fix our partners?
When you think about it in your own life, like whenever somebody lectured you or when somebody told you to do something differently, like how often has it worked? Probably never, right? But yet we often think like I know better than my partner, or I see that my partner has immense potential and I want to bring that out in them. Or like in the case of the story that you just gave, the woman felt like her husband was suffering. And
Mm.
nobody wants to watch their partner suffer or sabotage themselves, whether it's that they smoke or they eat too much junk food or whatever it is. We often think this is my job is to save them from themselves. And people become so consumed with trying to fix somebody else. And unfortunately, it often has the opposite reaction. The more you lecture somebody or you tell them this is bad for you or you should do things differently, in their minds, there's research behind this. In their minds, they're actually thinking about all the reasons why they want to keep doing that thing. And it actually cements them into doing that even more often.
Mm.
And so then people get into this cycle where the more the partner's trying to get the person to change, the more the other person is convinced they're going to keep doing what they want to do. And it's really hard to get out of that cycle.
Mm. I want to read a little bit from your book. I loved this from this section. Okay, let me pull it up. It says, but your job isn't to fix them. You aren't a surgeon who is going to repair them. You also aren't their coach or a trainer who needs to educate, motivate, and correct them. You're not their parent who needs to teach or discipline them. Fixing someone involves a pattern of behavior, not just those moments when you're offering an alternative viewpoint. Constantly rescuing someone from their poor choices or trying to save them from themselves isn't healthy. Find that healthy balance where you provide support and share your opinion without trying to force them into making changes they don't want to make. Attempting to fix your partner changes the dynamic of the relationship and damages it. How can someone do the influencing and the supporting when they do want to really truly just help their partner's life be a little bit better, how can they do that rather than that the surgeon of fixing them?
So you can certainly point out if you see something and you want to have a conversation that says, I'm really concerned. I've been seeing you sleep way too much, or you haven't been sleeping enough. You've been eating all of this, whatever it is, point it out, but only point it out once. Our tendency is to point it out every day, if not multiple times a day, of you're still doing this, or why aren't you doing that? You don't listen to me. Have like one conversation where you say, hey, I've noticed this, I'm concerned. And then ask, do you have any concerns? And the person might be like, no, I'm good. And if they
Mm,
are, your job is to back off. If they were to say, yeah, I'm really struggling, we can say, do you want some help with that? Should we problem solve? Do you need to see the doctor? Whatever it is. But more often than not, they're going to say, actually, no, I think it's fine. Or I do it because of X, Y, or Z. Your job then is to back off. Because again, they'll
mm,
believe the words coming out of their mouth, not yours. So at some point, though, you're going to see what we call a wish or a dip. So let's say somebody is drinking too much. At some point, you might hear them say, gosh, I wish I could get up on Saturday mornings. Oh, you wish you could get up on Saturday mornings. What do you think would help with that? You want them to come to the conclusion that maybe I shouldn't be drinking so late on Friday nights. So that's a wish. Sometimes it's a dip when somebody says, I wish I didn't drink so much so that I could remember the conversations I had. Oh, so you'd like to remember the conversations that you have. Let's talk about that. So it's really a dip in the motivation to do something that's bad for their health or their well-being. So you're going to wait for those opportunities. And then again, you're not going to lecture. You're just going to ask questions like, oh, what do you think would help with that? Or how do you think you could sleep better? And be a good listener. And the more that you show that you're willing to listen without passing judgment, the more the other person's going to talk. And again, if they then say, maybe I shouldn't drink so much, or I shouldn't stay up so late, that's what will then change their behavior is when they say those words.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, I think this is even going to help with my tween, not drinking, but just the behavior changes when I want behavior changes from anybody in my life. If it were an employee or whatever, it seems like this is more of the way to approach those conversations where you just open it up.
Absolutely. I mean, this is what I do as a therapist. I don't tell people what to do or how to change their lives. I ask questions and help people come to the conclusion about what they want to change. And to know that sometimes people, when they change, it's not the change necessarily that we think they should have. Somebody says, yeah, I'm going to cut down to just 2 drinks a night. Maybe
Mhm.
we want them to drink 0. But if that's what they're willing to do, you start there. Oh, okay, that's a good experiment. Let's see what happens. Or
Mhm.
somebody says, I'd like to start, if you have a tween who says, I'm going to stay up later. Okay, well, let's see what would happen if you did that. And we can talk about having an experiment where you do stay up a little bit later and see if you can still get up in the mornings. And to just be open to that and letting people experiment a little bit, come up with some of their own solutions and to try those solutions on their own.
Mhm, and the independence that builds. I think a lot of time in partnerships, we feel that we are one, and I think as I was reading, any of the things that we do right in my relationship, I thought, I think this is because we allow ourselves to be independent humans.
Yeah, there is something about forming a partnership that we often then think it's our job to take over pretty much everything in one another's lives. And while there's some truth that yes, you're joining your 2 lives together, on the other hand, if you try to just become the same blob of people, it doesn't work. That if you're trying to control the other person and you think they're trying to control you, it really doesn't change people's behavior. Instead, it makes people push those behaviors underground. They become more secretive. They get better at pretending like something isn't a problem. It really leads to a lot of dysfunction.
And secrecy, lying, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, when my husband and I were dating, we got in a fight and the fight would, there was some name calling and there was all this, it wasn't the best communication. I thought about this in the communication chapter. And so we set ground rules and I was like, we're not going to talk about breaking up when we're in a fight. We're not going to swear at each other and we are not going to call each other names. Which I think has been very beneficial. I don't even know what possessed my 20-something-year-old self to demand this from fighting, but I'm glad that it did. Um, for a couple who's been in a relationship for a decade, decades, and that has been part of how they fight, but one of them doesn't want to fight that way anymore. How can they start rewriting the rules of that? That can be very contentious.
It can. And so again, I think if your partner's open to saying, let's set some ground rules, by all means, the two of you can sit down and say that. And so I've worked with couples who maybe after 20 years of marriage, when they get in a heated discussion, they're still threatening divorce, just like you said, where they're talking, tossing out like the two things that they know would hurt their partner the
Mm.
most, bringing something up from 20 years ago. And and then the conversation quickly goes downhill and nothing gets solved because suddenly they went from talking about their finances to now they're about to get divorced, and that's where all the conversations end up. So if your partner's open to it, you sit down and say, let's talk about some ground rules. We're stuck in this cycle right now, this pattern that isn't working. And here's where it goes. If we said, okay, when we get too heated to have this conversation, we're both just going to take a 5-minute break. And maybe there's a signal. Sometimes people are like, I'm just going to raise my hand and say 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we're going to come back. And that really works for a lot of couples. Then that's a wonderful thing. If your partner isn't interested in having that conversation and maybe they're not as invested in change, you can still decide, okay, I'm not going to stoop to that level anymore. If you raise your voice, I'm not going to raise mine. If you resort to name calling, I might say, I'm not okay with that. Let's back up, or I'm going to discontinue the conversation until we can both be civil. You have lots of options. And again, it's about changing your behavior. When you change your behavior in an argument, I guarantee it's going to throw the other person off, especially the first few times you do it. And they really don't know what to do.
Hmm.
And you'll see that unfold. And they may try to suck you back in or get you to resort to your old patterns. But if you can stick to it, you can create change. After several of those arguments, the other person is going to change how they argue. I guarantee it.
Hmm. Um, that's bravery and that's courage, so, like we talked about earlier. So just taking those small steps, I think, will be really impactful. So thanks for granting that permission to any listener who wants to change that behavior in their household. I also loved in another chapter, we're going to bounce around through the chapters. Really, we need like an hour per each one minimum. um, Okay, let's see. So strong couples, I think the chapter is don't forget why they fell in love. And this one I was like, "Oh yeah, I can skip this one." But then I was like, "No, I got to take a minute to read this one." I loved in this one where how life is. Maybe you can talk us through this, how couples forget why they fell in love in the first place.
So a lot of couples, when they meet, obviously the other person kind of becomes the center of your world for a while and
Mhm.
everything is blissful. And you're experiencing all these physical changes in your body. We know that all of these chemicals in your brain really draw you into the other person, and that helps you bond early on. And in fact, they'll say that like falling in love is a lot like when you if you were to get addicted to a drug, that we have things like you develop a tolerance and you have withdrawal if the other person were to break up with you, and you have cravings for seeing the other person. Our brain responds in a very similar way. Over time, those chemicals in the brain shift. So after 10 years of marriage, you probably still don't feel that same need to be around your partner all the time. And that's when people start to sometimes be a little bit less committed to working through problems, and they aren't quite as committed to one another, and they may have a wandering eye that makes them think about how the grass would have been greener if they'd stuck with their ex or something like that. And that's really where we get into the danger zone, where people struggle to remember, like, why did I pick this person? However millions of people that you could have ended up with, you ended up with this person. Why? And why did they choose you? And even after 5 years, 25 years of marriage, if you can look back and remember, like, yeah, there's a reason. And even though they may not be the exact same person, like some couples meet in college, and when you're 45 years old, you have kids and careers and life has really changed. You're not the exact same person that you were, and hopefully they aren't either, but you've stuck together. And that at their core, they probably still have very similar values to what they had back then. Their roles have shifted and their life has changed a lot, but they're still the same person,
Mhm.
essentially. And just remembering that, I think for a lot of couples helps them then say, okay, this is worth it. This is why I want to work through our problems. This is why I'm going to stay committed. This is why I'm not going to make these bad choices. Because, yeah, you and I are committed to each other.
Mhm. I love the activity that you had the couple in the book that you talked about do. They just wrote a list of things they loved about each other. So in the middle of, they're fighting and managing schedules and managing a household and all the things that you do once you've been married for so many years, they came back with these lists, and they also of what they loved about each other. And I love so many things about this. One, that they fought less throughout the week, but also that when they when they shared their list with one another, they became so regulated that they were able to talk through solutions for their fighting.
That's just it. So for couples who, we often forget like why we love our partner. Instead, we're like, oh, they spend so long doing this, washing the dishes, or how come they just can't sit down and do this project, or why do they have to complain about their day every day? And we just remember the negative. We get focused on the not so good stuff. And research will show that when they put objective people, and they actually did an experiment where they put objective people in somebody's house and had them observe like how many amazing things that this partner did versus how many amazing things that somebody's partner counted that the other person did, the numbers were way off. And it basically is saying that we overlook the good things our partners do when we get stuck in a unhealthy cycle of negativity. We tend to only notice the bad. Oh, you were 10 minutes later than you said you were. You forgot to buy milk on the way home today. And we forget that they did
Mhm.
some amazing things today too. And so that's why it's important sometimes to just do that. Take a step back and say, let's talk about why we do love each other. And when you really force that to happen, you make a list of the top 10 reasons why you love your partner. It just reminds you, all right, there's a lot of good things that I do overlook on a daily basis. And that gives you a little more of a balanced outlook. And then when you start thinking about the positive, it drums up more positive emotions. And then it makes it easier to say, all right, you forgot the milk, but that's not the end of the world. Let's have a conversation about how perhaps both of us can be better at running the household together.
I love that. I love how powerful that really simple action is. Okay, in the beginning of the book, you wrote who this book isn't for, and we've talked about so many ways to start improving your relationship, but I also just wanted to include that little piece. Who is this book not for, and who, is this conversation not for?
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because I wanted to make it clear that if you're in an abusive relationship, if you're in a relationship with somebody who has a significant substance use problem, this book is probably not for you. Instead, you might need professional help. That could come in the way of an individual therapist, a support group, lots of different support options out there. But I didn't want anybody to think that if they just hung in there a little bit longer, they're in a really unhealthy relationship that's abusive, that it's a sign of weakness if they are struggling. Your Who you live with, your environment greatly affects your mental strength. And if it's a really unhealthy situation, I don't care how much you're working on yourself, you're just not going to be able to get there. So I didn't want people to think that this book was going to perform a miracle if you're in an abusive situation. Instead, you need a different level of support.
Yeah, I have seen that in my own eyes, and so I love that you included in that in the book. I think that's so important. So thank you for that. Before I let you go, I like to ask all my guests what is the number one tip for finding more joy in the good, the bad, and the in between. And this can be, if you want, it can be for relationships, but you have a huge wealth of knowledge, so it can just also be happiness in your life.
I would say that emotions don't last forever. So when you experience the uncomfortable ones, know that it's going to go away at some point, even though it feels like it won't in the moment. And then when you're experiencing joy and happiness, enjoy it. It's not going to last forever, but enjoy it while it's there.
I absolutely love that. That has been a little bit of my mantra this last year.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for your time. And I also just want to do one more plug for the book because the every single chapter, even the one that I was like, "Oh, I think I don't need this one." I was like, "Oh, I'll read it anyway." Every single one made an impact on me, and I think that what you're doing is incredible with all of your books, making an impact in everyone's life. So, thank you for that, and I just think that's very exciting work.
Oh, thank you so much for saying all that. I appreciate it.
We didn't get to one of my favorite chapters, which was about being a martyr. And I loved this chapter because as I read it, I was like, oh my gosh, I am the martyr of my relationship when it comes to, staying up till 2 a.m, cleaning my house and being like, I do everything. So I loved the book because it gave some tools and some ideas and kind of just showed the way that other couples handled being the martyr. And I was like, okay, I'm putting an end to this and already have stepped back from my midnight cleaning. And my house is a little dirtier than I would like it to be, but I think we're going to get there. I got the whole family on board, which is a lot healthier of a place to be than staying up until 2 a.m. cleaning my house. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Amy. She has such a wealth of knowledge. You can find more information, including her other books, all in show notes. Thanks for being here on Happiness and Progress.